Okay, hello everyone. I am Nim Dewhurst, and this is the fantasy race video, which I decided to put out now because I think I got a request for it, and I would like to do it. Now, sorry, I just had to mute my computer. Um, Now the thing for me is that I want to put out this fantasy race video, and this will be taking a step away from the world breakdown that we've been doing for the last three episodes and into something else. So if you all don't mind, I'm going to put out this video, maybe one or two more on fantasy races. There's a couple of things I want to cover that won't really fit inside of a 10-minute video. So I'm going to do those, and then we will get back to the world breakdown. And to start with, the first three videos, the three fantasy race videos will be as follows. I want to do one on the classic fantasy races. So that means the elves, dwarves, halflings, that kind of thing, and how I think they should fit into a fantasy world, or how I think they can be employed, made to be their own thing. I want to do a second video on how to build your own fantasy races, because I use a lot of stuff for that. And then the other idea I have is to break down my fantasy races, which will probably be the last one, and it will be our segue back into talking about Croesus. This video is the how to build your own fantasy race video, and I'm making it now because I think that one is the most useful for all of you. You can find tons of videos out there of people breaking down fantasy races, but in terms of creating your own, I think the content's a little bit limited, and that's what I want to provide people with. So here goes. When building my own fantasy races, the first thing I consider is climate. I consider the world, so obviously Croesus is fixed orbit, so one side of that planet is going to be hot and the other side is going to be cold, and there's going to be everything in between. And I consider the climate, or the region that I want to populate with the race. So if it's a far northern region, then my race needs to have adapted to exist in the far north. If it's a mountainous region, so on. If the race lives underground, then so on. And so that's really important. And a little bit of Google searching can find you traits that are crucial for different races. I mean, darker skin is usually an attribute of living in a hotter climate, so races that exist in deserts or jungles or more temperate areas should have darker skin. Or if you're going for realism in your world, or Earth-like realism in your world, then those races should probably have darker skin. If you notice, I believe that more slitted eyes and also less hair on the body are attributes of races adapted to living in colder climates. So, I mean, look into that. Don't quote me on that, but those are definitely things. You can also have, more blubber or fat on races adapted to existing in colder climates. Hair color can sort of be up to you. Again, the size of eyes, that sort of thing. Maybe a race that eats predominantly meat has canine or sharper teeth. So that's what you want to consider. And obviously the next thing I'm going to go into is my fantasy race generator, which can totally be adapted. I may make a big one and put it up on the screen for you guys so that you guys can just use that if you want to. But basically, I have a generator I use to create the look of my fantasy races. So basically, I have about 5 features on the table I'm using now. There may be a different table on screen for you, but I'm going to pick 3 of them. And all these tables are done with a dice. So the one I'm using is a D6. I'm not sure if that will be the same for you. The idea is you pick one of the rows and you roll a 6-sided dice, and that gives you a random one. Or you can just pick a random one. But the 6-sided dice is if you can't choose. Okay, so I could take this and I can say eyes. They have thin and slitted eyes. Build, they are incredibly tall and thin. And their skin is dappled, multicolored. And a dappled, multicolored skin, you can now think about where that might exist in your world. I mean, a lot of animals use that for camouflage, so a dappled, maybe brown and white skin could be a race of people living in jungles. So they better blend in. I actually do have a race called the mottled men in my world, which have skin like this, and I'll break them down when I get into the My World race video. So we could look at this and we can say, okay, they're incredibly thin and tall, so we'll assume long limbs, but maybe not a lot of physical strength, but quite a lot of dexterity. And their eyes are thin and slitted, so maybe they're ideal for living in hot climates. So maybe this race lives in a hot jungle, although maybe big eyes would be better for a jungle, but for now we'll go. We can always change them. There's another option on this list that says large golden cat-like eyes, and we might use those. And we might say that this race has large golden cat-like eyes, they're incredibly tall and thin, and they have mottled skin. And they're a race of maybe a jungle-dwelling tribe that climbs a lot, that dwells in treetops and that kind of thing. Maybe that is their advantage, and maybe they're not as physically powerful, not as adept with drawing a heavy bow or throwing spears or using clubs, and maybe they rely on traps and poison. Or maybe they're a master race of animal tamers that, they could have tamed caiman in the waters around their base defending it, or have tamed big cats or large jungle dogs or whatever you want to roll with. And that sort of thing. So how I create my races is usually I get random traits from my table, and then I see where that race would fit in. If we did another one and we said, okay, they have bushy, deep red hair, thick grey skin, and pronounced bone structure, maybe sort of hard, square chins, maybe high cheekbones. This could be a race of mountain savages, grey skin to blend in the mountains, and that sort of thing. Bushy, deep red hair, kind of to create this almost like tribal mane around them. Possibly they plait it and oil it into shapes. And then sort of like hard, heavy jaws and pronounced bone structure, maybe a mountain clan. And so basically you can kind of pick an environment based on the traits you roll on the random race table. Following that, I then like to name my races. And I do this by basically creating any prefix and then using a suffix from our world. So if you don't notice, knees is a common suffix. We have Chinese or that kind of thing, which we can use as so that is chai, the prefix, and then knees, the suffix. So I know in my fantasy world there are a race called the Yinanese, or there's also a race called the Kazis, which is kind of similar. Again, we have AN or EAN, like European, American, Australian, and that can again be maybe you're I know I have a country called Ravenna, I believe, and someone could be Ravenan or Ravenanese, depending on what you want. So usually I just pick a beginning couple of sounds for the start of the name of the race, and sometimes I make it evocative or fitting. So I have an almost sort of semi-insect-like strange race of people. I mean, they are mammals, but they evoke a lot of insects, and they are the Kazis, because I think that sounds dramatic, sounds interesting, that kind of thing. So in terms of naming your races, I definitely recommend using suffixes from races in our world and then creating your own prefixes. The last thing I want to talk about is what I call like bloodline traits or gene traits, and I think they're really cool ways to distinguish bloodlines of power or importance in your world. Now, I think a series that does this really well is Game of Thrones. And in Game of Thrones, all the Targaryens, who are, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar, but they're one of these noble, important families. All the Targaryens have white blonde, platinum blonde hair and purple eyes, and those are sort of the symbols of their great house. They are otherwise humans. I mean, humans with very pale skin, but human with these traits. Or all the Baratheons, another one of the important houses, have bright blue eyes and bushy black hair. These kind of things. Or you could have, a family with a recurring, maybe all this family have like sort of one cat's eye, like a deformity which appears as like a snake in the eye or something like that. Or maybe this family, they all have a certain birthmark or that appears, or patches of strange skin. Or if you want to have an evil family, you could have a clan in your world and they all have this eye-based affliction, this sort of strange thing that causes their eyes to appear like maybe a pale green with a strange broken pupil, and maybe that gives them the ability to see in the dark. It's up to you what you want to do with it, but I think that including bloodline traits when it comes to the races in your world can be incredibly cool, can be incredibly interesting. I hope you all found this video useful. I tried to keep it as short as possible and cover the key things I want to do. The next video will probably be the fantasy races in my world at this point. So yeah, that's basically what we're working with. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully I've thrown up on the screen some examples for you guys, and catch you all next time. Goodbye.